Welcome, everybody. I see Danielle is here, Jasmine, Natalie, Tracy, and Yang. Welcome, everybody. We sort of went into discussion a little bit of writer's block because a lot of what happens when people return to school, some of my students after only a year or two, but many of my students after 12, 15, 20, or even more years that they have not been in formal education. And unless their work has involved writing, this is somewhat of a difficult challenge to combine their research with their writing. One of the things that I learned early on was that and I was doing in-person tutoring, but for people taking online classes. But one of the things I learned early on was to start with some content instead of trying to start by just searching in your head for inspiration and having nothing on the page. I used to call that blank screen disease. And Tracy has done some writing for a living, and I'm just going to have you give some peer coaching if you're ready for it. You were talking about that a little bit.
Oh.
You used to do grant writing, and
yeah.
What did you do as opposed to just sort of starting from scratch at a blank screen with nothing? How did you get started?
Well, I guess I got started by, first of all, you'd be issued a reasonably large document that you'd have to read all of, and then I would start dissecting it and start putting my information together. I guess I'm not always conventional in how I do things. I may not always do them in the order that the document is noted, because I might come upon something that just kind of inspires me, and I start writing about that, and then I'll go back to another question that might be a prior question or something that I have to discuss and prove or provide statistics and things for. So I oftentimes, I won't just start at the very beginning all the time. I'll look at the whole assignment or requirement, and then if something in particular inspires me, that's where I start.
Okay, is that a fair statement that I've got up on the screen there?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
But
this gets you going on it because you did not stare at a blank screen for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
You got something on the page that either interested you or seemed most necessary to you based on what you had been reading.
Right,
That's
but I do
taken.
think it's critical, though, that you read everything that's required so that as you start writing, I think what happens is, at least in my process, when I start writing, things that I start writing trigger other things, which then applies to something either prior or after, what I'm working on. So I take a lot of notes. I do a lot of partial sentences and things just as a reminder and a trigger for me, so that I can go back and elaborate on those things. But not everything is done. Not everything is done in your head before you start writing. You figure out some of it after you've got things on the page. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's more of a fluid thing for me.
Right.
Yeah, I don't put it all in my mind and then I take it from my mind and transcribe it onto the screen or a piece of paper. It's a very fluid thing for me. It's very dynamic, and I keep going back and editing and reading and adding things and taking things away. Things that seemed relevant at first no longer become relevant as I do more research. So if they're no longer as relevant or as important, I'll take them out and add something else. So it's a very fluid thing for me. I never just come up with a single I don't know, format, if you will, in my mind and then apply it to a piece of paper. It just doesn't happen that way for me.
Yeah, writing, when you're trying to write original content, you aren't necessarily going to just type out 2, 3, 4, 5 pages without making any changes.
Right.
You may need to type and edit later, and that is true for the higher level work within paralegal studies and within paralegal work. For higher level work, it's not necessarily doing everything at top speed and then it's done.
No, I think too that when you're doing your research, and this applies to grants and what we're doing now, that you tend to do your research and then there's the basic research, but then you start to get into more of the minutia, if you will. But that's actually what I found is I start following threads, and you know, I'll read something, there'll be something there, it'll trigger something in my mind, and then I'll go on and research something else that actually comes back and applies to it. It either explains it further for me and gives me more of an in-depth knowledge, or I might find just the opposite, that it negates what I said and therefore it doesn't apply because I found another detail that makes it non-applicable and therefore I shouldn't be including it.
Okay.
So.
Very good. I'm going to state kind of an easy memory tool for those that have not done much writing, and it will apply to this week's work. This week we're working on statutes that are criminal homicide statutes. And I do want original comments from each student, but it's much easier to come up with the original comments if you don't stare at a blank screen too long. It's easier, in my view, easier for most, not everybody maybe, but easier for almost all, if you use some kind of a method of getting something on the page. So what I'm suggesting is what I call quote, paraphrase, launch. And even if you do not have blank screen disease, which is what I call modern writer's block, even if you never get that, I still think that this is a good thing to memorize if you ever do get stuck. But you say, well, quote, that is so easy that it seems to make the writing too easy, but of course it's not too easy. It's never too easy. So you have already found a statute, so go ahead and quote it. You found. Put it in quotes the normal ways, and then cite it. And you say, well, that was easy enough. I know how to find statutes, or if I didn't know how to find statutes, I can find the phone number that for Lexis Research, or I can do the chat on FastCase. You know, I can use tutoring. I can call Kirk, which is me, of course. If I know that I want a criminal homicide statute, I can get good help. If I don't know whether I want a statute or not, it's hard to get help aside from the instructor. Okay, so, and I spelled quote wrong, but in one place, but don't worry about that. I'm not going to try to fix it. After you quote, then you paraphrase and you say, I don't have to cite that. Yes, you do. So paraphrase it. Why is paraphrase important when you're trying to break writer's block? It's because it's a kind of a midway between quoting and launching your own thinking. So paraphrase it in your own words or part of your own words, okay? I worked on this with students in person, and they were amazed at how it broke through their blockages, because they were blocking themselves not because they had too few ideas, but they had too many ideas that they wanted to put on the page. They had lots of stuff built up, and students who have been told for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you should go to college. And then they finally do, and then they've got so much inside themselves to pour out. So, and that actually can create a kind of a problem. But, quote, paraphrase, get it partly on your own words. So you find a manslaughter statute and you understand it fairly well. So you quote it, then you paraphrase it as well as you can. You might be phrasing it in a way that isn't quite right, but I want you to try it, okay? And then cite again the same statute. And what do I mean by launch? What I mean is launch your own thinking. State your own personal comments as if to the supervising attorney. This statute could apply because this statute appears to be inapplicable unless we find new facts like this, okay? Does this stuff make sense to the folks that are here in terms of reaching out to students that are having difficulty because they've got too many thoughts in their head?
Yes.
And some students, maybe they don't feel like they have too many thoughts in their head, but they're just scared. They're scared to tackle it. It seems like it's difficult, so it's easier to put off than do. But of course, then on Sunday night, suddenly it's easier to do than put off, but then it's pressure, pressure, pressure. That's the idea. That's why I call it quote, paraphrase, launch. And what did we do when I had students that had a lot of trouble? We'd actually do the first part of it, and it wasn't always statutes because I was coaching people who were in different programs. Some students even in programs that I didn't personally understand. They said, "Well, I have to do an essay." I've never had to do an essay, and I've worked for many years, but I've never had a job where you had to do an essay. And I said, "Well, that's okay. Just find something and get it down there and then cite it." And do you have a citation guide? Yes, they did. Well, okay. Then I'd go talk to somebody else, one of the other people being tutored, and see how they were doing. Or I may go get a cup of coffee, come back. I said, "Well, I did that." And I started paraphrasing it. I said, "Good, that's what I wanted you to do, paraphrase it. Now cite it again, same kind of cite you just put in." "Well, now I put it in my own words, and I'm still citing it?" "Yes." "Now I want you to walk up and down the hallway or walk outside, get some fresh air." They come back, and I said, "Now, based on what you've got out there, some important information, now I want you to comment on it. And this will give you a little focus power because you've got something concrete on the page. Comment on only that." And sort of like Tracy talked about, they said, "Well, okay, I can do that pretty fast. What should I do then?" I said, "Well, you probably have other things you want to discuss. You might want to quote something else from a different source. In your case, you'll find another couple of statutes, maybe a different manslaughter or a different murder statute. Quote it, paraphrase it, and then launch your thinking again." And it's important, in my view, to take, if you are having trouble, not to just try to do it all in one sitting. I would get some fresh air or get a cup of coffee, do something before you complete it. That's just my opinion. If that doesn't work for you, fine. Don't use my method, but it's worked out for everybody that's tried it, that I've talked to. And I've coached people over the phone and, of course, in person too. So that is the hardest assignment that we're really doing. And I'm going to rush ahead to the memorandum, okay? Then I'll backtrack to some of the other stuff, okay? Now we're leaving the civil side behind. And if everywhere if you see the word wrongful death, I want you to mentally cross it off. And these things were supposed to be taken out of the assignment. We're not talking about if this is a crime. We know that there's some kind of crime, but we're going to try to get the client to bargain for a plea to a lesser charge. So we're helping the defendant this time, and we're trying to figure out if there's some lesser charge. It may be a degree of murder, but it may be a degree of manslaughter. We don't really have enough facts, so we are going to give Jane Anderson, the attorney, just some ideas about statutes and then some suggestions about what else we might need to know to get a lesser charge for the client. Any comments or questions about that? Let's see if we can, let's take a look at it. Yeah, we really don't have a lot of new facts. I'm not seeing low facts or new facts. So we're going to have to say, well, it looks like that since it was an intentional killing, or it appears to be an intentional killing, it could definitely be murder. But if we can show that it was not entirely intentional, could we get a manslaughter in or a reckless discharge of firearm? If it was a discharge of a firearm that caused it. Of course, we're at the stage where we're just speculating, and then we're going to have to ask Jane Anderson to get the police reports, maybe have our own investigator out there, and try to figure out which statute might work. Questions, comments, problems? I would soft pedal the conclusion. We're probably not going to get a final conclusion. Conclusions are still going to be ifs. So at an early stage of the case, we do want some preliminary research on statutes. Who would like me to look up statutes from their state on the criminal side of the case? And which states? Because I love to open up Lexis or Fastcase if people would prefer Fastcase, or both. Lots of folks, lots of lawyers have Fastcase. They say that they have it for free. Technically, it's not for free because they had to typically pay some dues to a bar association to get it. But if they're dues paying members for a state and some county bar associations, they already have Fastcase. Some lawyers do not even know they have it. If you learn to use Lexis, though, you're going to find Fastcase reasonably easy. Fastcase is very similar. It just it has fewer sources, so in some ways it's easier to navigate to the correct sources because you just don't have as many choices. So we'll do Florida, Minnesota, Illinois, and we're going to look up homicide, and know that homicide may not always work as a search term. Okay? May not always work. We may have to go right to murder or manslaughter. They may not have reckless discharge of a firearm. They may have different terminology in your state. Do not be ashamed to ask me for assistance. Ask a tutor for assistance, library, and Lexis itself. And I should remind you of the Lexis phone number too. Put that on the bottom of this page. How's that? Okay, can you see that on the bottom of the slide now? Okay. Florida, Minnesota, Illinois. Okay. And I realize I'm not trying to pretend like you guys don't know it, but not everybody, some folks, because of difficulties, are having trouble keeping track of things in this course. So that's why I'm reminding. I'm not, a bunch of you already know all this stuff. I realize that. But I have to kind of, I have to cater to people who know it all. Right now, they know lots, or I should say. They know lots of what is happening, and then there's significant numbers of folks that are trying to play catch-up ball due to difficulties beyond their control. So Florida, if you were looking for a statute, generally we go right to statutes. There are librarian-type tricks you can do. You can go to the wrong source to find the right source sometimes. If you have a really hard statute to find, you can find cases. Frequently, though, we go statutes first, and that's because in state law, lots of the cases basically are an explanation of a statute. And it's often easier to find the correct cases by finding the statutes first and then scrolling down to the cases. This is true in both Lexis and Westlaw. So we will try going to statutes and legislation, and I will go right to Florida annotated statutes. Once you get to know this big table of contents, you're going to love it. Because Florida and Illinois are divided into titles. So, and the titles make sense. They are official. Minnesota groupings of chapters are not. So, Minnesota is a little harder to learn than Florida and Illinois. Florida and Illinois have more of a stair-step pattern that I like. But there's an advantage if you have a less organized set of statutes like Minnesota, though. Once you do get to know the table of contents, you have an advantage. And that is true to some extent in Illinois and Florida, too. If you get to know this table of contents, you get an advantage over the people that have not been scrolling through it, who have only cherry-picked one or two things that they wanted to, that they were desperate to know, and they didn't look at anything else. So one of the things I like to do is skim. So I could go right to crimes towards the bottom. I'm going to try a different, and then open up, but I'm going to try a different method to start with. I'm going to try just the word homicide and see where that gets us. And you have vehicular homicide. We're pretty sure that it didn't take place in a car, so I'm not going to use that one. But you're seeing a certain number of things in 782. That's given us a clue that when we get to 782, we're close to pay dirt. Okay, and this is something. This chapter within this title looks like pay dirt. So I'm going to go to something, even though this is not probably our final answer. This is one of the types of manslaughter, but it gives us an idea of a title and a chapter within Florida law. So I'm going to go more to the chapter right now. And then you go to murder, attempted felony murder, and so on, different types of murder. So you could go here. This is not a one that we actually want, of course, being as we're on the defense side, but we need to explain this to, we need to give the cite to the attorney. You don't need to read all of this with great thoroughness, but you should know what murder is in your state. It's interesting because this includes what's called felony murder. When people die as a result of a felony, it can be a kind of murder in many states, in most states, okay? And I'm going to go back to the general homicide chapter. And here is a manslaughter, which is what we started with. And here's sort of the general manslaughter. And like I say, you could use vehicular homicide and state that it's not applicable unless it happened in a vehicle, if that's what you find by reading that. I think that's what you're going to find. Now I'm going to, excuse me. And then, of course, one advantage of Lexis is if you scroll down, you say, well, that goes so far, but how do the judges of this state apply it? You can find it right away. You can find it in these cases. Find out how people, what happens in real life if somebody violates the statute, and how is the statute interpreted. It's right below in Lexis. And now I'm going to go to Minnesota and Illinois. Are you ready? Still seeing it? Okay. By the way, when you find it one way, get out and then try it a different way. So in Florida, you found it in Chapter 782 near the bottom of the table of contents. If you found it through a search, then find the exact same thing using either full citation or going to table of contents. I'd like you to be able to find everything 3 different ways so you become an expert statute researcher. You can use you don't have to use an absolutely full citation with correct capital letters, but you do have to have spacing. So I don't have this exactly right because I haven't capitalized min or stat, but I did leave spaces. You see that I left the spaces? I believe this is theft here that I found, or that I wrote. And that'll still find it. Yeah, theft, okay. If you find the wrong thing in a category, you've still advanced yourself. I remembered Chapter 609, so I can go to Chapter 609, which is, in my state, is the criminal code. And then I can drill down crimes against the person, probably not yet since there's a specific one for homicide. Sometimes you can be fooled in a state statute code that they have an old, in some cases they have an older criminal code and everything appears to be repealed, and then you have a newer criminal code. So do not be discouraged if you get to one that has a whole string of those where it says it's repealed. But here in Minnesota, you have murder in first degree, second degree, third degree, manslaughter, criminal vehicular homicide, renumbered and repealed. Here's another criminal vehicular homicide, and so on. Does this make sense now? Okay. Let's start from the very beginning. So you find the wrong crime, and it gives you an insight into finding the correct crime, okay? We could try 609.20, and then it would still get us to this part of the, it would get us to specifics there, but then we could go to that part of the chapter too, and it would give us other choices. See, this is where Minnesota does not have a good stair step. Crimes, criminals, this is not even official. It's not even a title or anything. 609 chapters to 624, that's not official. And then homicide and suicide is not an official category either. It's just a portion of a chapter. So I like the more stair-step ones where it has each grouping is labeled. And I didn't know I didn't like Minnesota until I started doing all of these other states when teaching paralegal studies. But so you could start up here, just going right to the table of contents. And then you could say, well, I know that crimes are near the bottom. I think 6 something. And you say, well, it's not 606. Oh, there it is, 609. And then you just keep opening things up, okay? So then you just go and you open up plus signs, and then you keep opening them up. And you say, well, that's not it. That's not it. And you learn stuff by doing this. And you say, well, okay, that might be it. Maybe you looked at this one first and you said, well, that doesn't really bring us to homicide. So maybe it's the specific one, okay? Well, let's go to Illinois now, if you're ready. You ready? Excuse me. Go to home. Ready for Illinois? Okay. And we could go right to it since I know the table of contents pretty well, but I'm not going to. We're going to do it wrong and just see what happens. I'm not going to select a source. Homicide in every type of Illinois thing. Then it will put cases up on the top, and under the influence charge. So this would be a backwards way to do it. We could do it, we could sort it by newest to avoid getting to old outdated statutes. And like I say, backwards works reasonably well. Because they may cite the statute in there. Okay? Does that make sense? Well, it doesn't make 100% sense, but when desperate, use this, okay? Or a librarian or Lexis reference attorney will help you with this. You know there's a statute there, but it doesn't seem to be under any of the searches you're using. So you find a case and then use this, and then link to the statute inside of it, okay? And of course, I knew it was going to be in 720 ILCS anyway, but me knowing it doesn't help you, okay? So you need to, Illinois is a stair step. You got the big chapters, all of criminal offenses, then you got this criminal code, and then titles, specifics, part B, you know, and then article. And in some cases, some students that are new to Illinois law get put off by the fact that you have all this stair step. But once you get used to the fact that you go from the whole statutes to the big chapter, you know, title, parts, articles, once you get used to the table of contents here, you're going to love it. The only thing you might not like is the fact that the overall chapters are not alphabetical, but once you get used to the fact, maybe you get some clues, it'll work. And then this case, the stair step's already been done for you, but we can demo it. Chapter 720, criminal offenses, go down. Now, if you were just doing it totally from scratch, you might think it's under criminal procedure, and by messing with criminal procedure, opening it up, you're going to find out that it's not really in there. But you will learn other stuff by accident, so to speak. But I'm going to look at criminal offenses, and then go with, you could start with offenses against persons, see if it's there. Then you see it's specialized things, so we're not going to do that one. So we're going to go with criminal code, and then drill down from there, okay? And I'm going to try doing it wrong. Here we have first degree murder, second degree manslaughters, okay? But I'm going to try 720 ILCS 5 without putting the slash in there and see if it does anything for us, okay? Because some things work and some things don't. We're going to go just to the statutes annotated. Was it 5 or was it 9? 5? It still worked. We didn't do it correctly, and it still worked. Okay? Questions, comments, problems? See, we didn't type it all. You don't necessarily have to with the modern Lexis. You can type parts of it in completely. If you don't leave any spaces, though, I can about guarantee you it won't work. Manslaughter is a lesser crime than murder in all states I've seen. Okay? The same fact sometimes could have multiple charges. Do not search for wrongful death. The labels used in criminal law are different. What are they? Homicide, murder, manslaughter. There are others. Felony murder. There's other options, like I say, reckless discharge of a firearm, which is not used as a term in all states. Negligent homicide, not used in all states. Murder and degrees of murder. Is that making sense, or is anybody have any difficulty that they'd like to describe? Or okay, making sense? Okay. this is frequently the hard part. I have simplified this a little bit when I say it requires extensive planning in detail. Not sure. I don't really want you to do super extensive planning in detail. Okay. The reason is because if you typically don't do anything with planning in detail, then I'm going to tell you to do a lot. If you typically go way overboard on planning in detail, I'm going to tell you to set a time limit for yourself. And I do have students all over the world, not the world necessarily, but at least the country, set a time limit. We have statutes that are described. We can apply them to some extent. Okay. We can understand that it's a different level of intent required for different homicide statutes. There are okay. And you can learn those things and describe them. One of the things that's puzzling to people, I think, is what do you, since I keep pushing and pushing and pushing for primary sources, how come I don't tell you to use secondary sources? Well, it is good to use secondary sources. I want you to primarily find statutes. But if you want to use secondary sources, I can help you find secondary sources in your particular state. Statement of assignment is basically simple as to describe and apply criminal statutes, 3 of them. And then the issue is basically lesser crime. I'm not going to type it all, but can we find a lesser crime that we can use, okay? To benefit the defendant. You say, well, why would you want to benefit the defendant? You would want the defendant to have no crime at all, right? So that sounds confusing, but it really isn't. In some cases, it's clear that the person killed somebody, but it's not clear whether they intended to kill them, or if they intended to kill them, which would in most states be called second-degree murder and intentional killing, was it premeditated? In other words, was there an actual plan to kill the person, or was it just simply the person intended to strike blows against the person and then the person dies? Did they actually premeditate the death itself, or did they just take actions that would could result in death? Or was it even lesser applicability? Was it simply a recklessness? The person was messing with a firearm and being reckless and careless. And view the rubric, of course. Do you guys want to review or just go on? I think maybe we should skip the review for now and go on and give you some more time for digging into it, and then ask me the questions with course messaging. What do you think? Spend a little bit of more review time, or just quit and go to work? Not offended either way. That would be a good plan. Danielle suggested go ahead and dig into it, and then reach out, text me for a return phone call or course message. Sounds good.